Why can't SEOs describe the task that they want me to do clearly?
Why don't developers understand SEO basics?
Why do SEOs give us solutions that do not work with our tech stack?
Why do I have to wait so long for my development changes?
With me today is Crystal Carter, Head of SEO Communications at Wix, formerly working at Optix Solutions as a Senior Digital Strategist with years of SEO experience under her belt. A Californian in the UK, she enjoys walks in the woods, wildlife gardening, and perfecting her guacamole recipe.
Martin Schlitt is a developer advocate from Google's search relations team. He's a geek who loves tech, old and new. Living in Switzerland, he also loves cheese.
Hello and welcome everybody. With me today is Crystal. I'm super excited to have you here, and I watched a talk of yours a while back, and that really spoke to me as a developer, and I would love to talk to you about something that I observed coming from the developer's perspective. Oftentimes, SEOs barge in to the development team and they're like, oh my god, we need to figure out our canonicals, and there's this other problem here with duplicate content. We're gonna get a penalty, blah blah blah, and oftentimes they are met with a blank gaze from the people they just spoke to. What's happening there? Why are we are working on the same thing? We are all working on the same projects together, and yet we seem to be so very different in terms of the vocabulary we use. Whoa. What's happening there?
I think I absolutely agree. This is something that I've seen a number of times. And I think that one of the things that's tricky is that we're sort of coming at it from different perspectives. Sometimes if you think about it, it's a bit like a band. Like if you have a band, you have your bass player, you have your guitar player, you have your drummer, and you're all trying to make a beautiful song. But the bass player has different things that they need to do. The drummer has different things that they need to do, and sometimes they overlap, sometimes they intersect. But really, what we all need to focus on is making sure that we're making beautiful music together. And so I think that it can be tricky, and I think sometimes it's because people who've built the website, the developers behind the website, they're very often they spent a lot of time and effort putting that together. So it's quite tricky when someone comes in and says, "Oh, it's broken. Oh, it's wrong. Oh, it doesn't work." And I think that it's really important to think about that when you're speaking to developers as an SEO. And one thing that I found that's really useful is to think about it as opportunities. So rather than saying this is broken or this is wrong, say we have an opportunity to make the website faster if we do X, Y, or Z. We have the opportunity to make the website easier for users to access in a different way if we do, this, that, or the other. And I find that generally speaking, if you go to it from that perspective, then it can sort of make those conversations a bit less
Confrontational.
Brutal.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love framing it as opportunities and possibilities to make things better, because fundamentally that's what developers want to do in the first place anyway. So that's really cool. I like it better than framing it as a problem or a thing that is broken or needs fixing. Because to be honest, it's also that developers are not even necessarily aware of these things, right? It seems to be like you are preaching from the holy book that is written in a language that isn't ours, and it comes out of nowhere and out of the blue, right? One day you're just implementing this feature and you're making sure it works in all browsers, works on all devices, is fast, and then out of the blue, someone is like, it's broken. So I like changing that into, here's an opportunity to make it even better. I do read up constantly on new technologies, on new things that browsers can do, on new trends in design, but I don't really even know where to get started on SEO. And I think one of the things that us developers need to do more is get out of our little bubble of development and actually look at SEO as, at least at the technical side of SEO, as something that is just part of what we deal with. Not necessarily, it's not part of our job to do this, but we should know about it, I think.
Yeah, I think so, and I think Google's really good at trying to bridge the gap between those spaces and trying to make it more clear for people to understand how that works. I think one of the things that's really useful when you're thinking about developing an SEO and understanding SEO as a developer is remembering that with SEO we're essentially taking the technology that a developer has built and we're interacting with it in the real world, and users are using it in lots of different ways, and the ways that users are using the site, the ways that users are interacting with the site are going to be very different from, there'll be millions, billions of possibilities for ways that people can access the site, ways that people will search for the site, ways for people that people will use the site from what we're able to test in a sort of test development framework. And so essentially when as soon as we build sites at my team, and as soon as we build a site, they always say, we've built the site, can somebody run it through a few tests? And I always run it through a few crawls, and there's always a few things that we pick up, because the SEO is essentially thinking about, it's search engine optimization, and which means that you're thinking about how people search for and arrive at the site, and how people interact with the information on the site, and how people use the site. So SEOs will have lots of user data based on that site itself. So let's say you're rebuilding a new site, so we'll have lots of historic user data about how people use the site, and then there'll also be general sort of industry user data. So it might be that you've built a lovely shopping framework, but we also know that within the shopping, the e-commerce space, that users have an expectation of being able to see this and be able to pay in this way, and being able to sort of have a cart that's really clickable and that sort of thing. So I think that development's a really tricky job, because there's a million different ways that you could build a website. Like there's a million different ways that you can build an app. The possibilities are endless. So it's tricky to expect one developer or even one developer team to know every single possible way you could build a website. But when people are using the site, that's where SEO and development interact. And I think that developers can speak to SEOs and ask them for data about what are the sort of customer expectations for this type of website, or what are the how fast should it be. So for instance, e-commerce sites tend to be a little bit slower than other websites, and that's because they've got lots of different tracking things on them, and they've got lots of different poor Martin isn't making
Isn't it
we
ironic?
try we
Yeah.
try, but it's true. So it's all sort of, it's all relative. We want to make sure that we're meeting user expectations. So I think developers can speak to SEOs and ask for more user data to help them build ahead of time. And I think that using some of the, like, Google has a lot of tools that overlap that I use. So like Chrome development tools I use all the time when I'm speaking to developers, and just things like view source can be really, really useful in Chrome, and that sort of helps bridge the gap between the two, and I think that where there's the willing to understand the two different parts of both how users are interacting with it and how businesses need a website to work, and how it's built in the framework, and that sort of thing, that there's opportunities for growth and opportunities to make the web better for everyone.
Yeah, and you said two things that I want to address with you now. Let's start with, so the one thing that you said is you run a bunch of tests, and there's a bunch of tools that developers can use. And then the other thing is, like, there's a bunch of different solutions. And I think those are two very interesting aspects. Let's start with the tests, because you said, like, once a website is done, I run a bunch of tests. That's what we as developers do while we are building it. So we have a bunch of tools that we are running to, like, figure out bits and pieces, like how fast is this website, where are problems coming from, is it behaving the way that we expect it to behave. And we actually write tests. We write test cases such as, if I click on this button, and then if I click on this button, I should see this thing. If I type something into this thing and then I click this button, something should happen. So, like, we're having a bunch of tests. I wouldn't even know what tools or tests to use for SEO, because for pretty much most of the things I have stuff, right? I can run a browser basically remote controlled by code. So to like click on buttons and fill in form fields and then see what happens. But what would I be looking for SEO? I actually don't know. And I don't know where to find out or what tools are available to me. I know Lighthouse has an SEO audit, but that seems very, very basic. So what would you say is something that developers should look into to support their SEO teams? What are technical aspects that developers should be aware of? Or where would they find out how? Or what would they have to? I don't even know what to ask an SEO.
So I would say that normally what happens when we launch a new site is I'll crawl it with something like Screaming Frog, which will give you information about crawl errors. And then the other thing is things like Search Console. Search Console gives you lots of information about the way that Google is seeing it, because different search engines will have different ways that they read websites. Different bots will have different ways that they read websites. So Search Console gives you lots of information about the way Google sees it, and it can also give you information about how different users are seeing it. So Page Experience a report, for instance, is based on real user information. So it might be that within your test framework that everything looks perfectly fine, everything's lovely and things, but it's sometimes like if you've ever written something and then you try to proofread it yourself, sometimes you don't see your own writing things because you spent so much time writing. Whereas if somebody else reads it, they'll go, well, you've missed a full stop, or you haven't said and there, or that sort of thing, because they've got sort of fresh eyes. And the other thing is that as a developer, you're looking at it from a developer's perspective, and you're fairly tech savvy, whereas users are going to be coming at it from lots of different perspectives. So I think it's really important to look at it the way that it's rendering on different browsers, the way that it's rendering on different machines, the way that it's rendering on different mobiles and devices as well. And yeah, tools like Search Console give you user data, how people are using it. And once it's live, I think once a new website is live, I think it's really important to think about how the is to expect to make further changes, and potentially expect to make further changes even 6 months down the line, because you'll have more data based on it. I think data is really important, particularly for businesses that are seasonal, or businesses that have sort of peaks and troughs. So the way I think about that sometimes is like if you were to do data on a tree, like on an oak tree, for instance, and you took all your data from between May and June, all of your data would tell you that trees are green. Oak trees are green. They have green leaves and they're great. But if you do it for the whole year, then you learn that sometimes all the leaves fall off, and sometimes there's no leaves. Sometimes the leaves aren't green at all. So the more data you have, the better you can prepare. And if you had the full data on the full year, then you'd know that we'd also need to buy a rake to go with the tree.
I love that image. That's a beautiful picture you're painting.
I do love painting pictures of trees.
Happy little trees.
Yes, precisely.
We're going to Bob Ross here.
Yeah, exactly. He's a legend.
That is awesome. I remember it's really nice that you mentioned Google Search Console, because I remember as a developer, again, coming from a developer background, the very first time I came into contact with it was when it was still called Webmaster Tools, if I remember correctly. And I was this is going to sound really weird. At the same time, I was overwhelmed and underwhelmed. And it was bizarre because I didn't even know where to look. But I think that's exactly one of these interfacing moments between SEOs and developers. Because if you come to this tool and you see like performance, impressions, clicks, what's happening, then it might be a lot to take in at first. But I think this is exactly where SEOs can guide the developers, or even just provide the data that they need for a specific conversation to underline that specific conversation. And I think this is what needs to happen. And if it happens, I remember working with one specific SEO a long time back, and she guided me through a bunch of the decision-making processes that I didn't even know existed. And that was very, very helpful. And I think data collection, as you say, like if you look at the trees only in the summer months, you might be very, very scared to see all the leaves fall off, because trees are supposed to have leaves all the time, and yeah.
I think the overwhelmed and underwhelmed thing is something that I've encountered sometimes. So sometimes when SEOs go to a dev, they say, right, we want to make all of the title tags do this and this and that and that, and they go, well, that only took me a minute to implement. Why is that really important? Does that really matter? Like, and it's like, from an SEO perspective, it's like, yeah, that makes a big deal, or that can make a big difference, or like, I've spoken to developers and I need you to add this particular bit of schema markup, and they're like, well, I just copied and pasted it, and I'm like, well, that's fine. That's great. I'm glad that it didn't take you long to implement, but it does have a big impact on like how Google crawls it and things. So something that's super simple that a lot of developers miss, and something that I always check every time we launch a new website is the sitemap. And just literally putting a sitemap on the website. Sometimes I explain it to people like, if I went to a restaurant, and I said, what's on the menu? If they give me a menu, then I can figure out what's on the menu. Or if I don't have a sitemap, then it's like just going to the restaurant and them just being like, yeah, have a look around, and you just see what other people are eating, which is essentially what you're asking Google to do. You're asking them to guess whether or not there's a Caesar salad on the menu. And like, they'll probably figure it out. Google's very sophisticated and, and everything. But it's better if you give them a menu.
I like that. Yeah. Again, beautiful analogy. That's lovely. But going back to the testing and the tooling, you mentioned a few tools and you mentioned Search Console. Search Console, the bigger challenge is that I, as a developer, can only use it once the site has gone live and Google has had a look at it. Can I use things like crawlers? Which one did you mention?
Screaming Frog. So
Screaming Frog, and I know there's like Ahrefs and all the others.
Yeah, Ahrefs.
Can I use those in development as well, like before the site goes public?
Yeah, so in a staging setting, you can use Screaming Frog to sort of understand if you've got gaps with like things like with page structure things. So for instance, H1s are super important. I think people very often underestimate that. That's another one that I very often see. So people very often don't put an H1 on the homepage, and I'm like, that is an easy win. Like, please put an H1 on your homepage. And so yeah, you can use Screaming Frog to see a lot of different things. There are many different layers and many different configurations of your Screaming Frog setup. So you can see a lot of the structural things like headings and title tags and meta descriptions and URL, like the URL structure and that sort of thing. And you can see all of those sorts of things, and then you can also see like the navigation and various other elements. And Screaming Frog is really useful with helping with the sort of understanding how the like the crawl depth for different pages, and so this goes back to indexation, which is about your website in the real world. So another metaphor. I speak in a lot of metaphors, but sometimes I think of it like the developer builds a plane and the pilot flies it, and so like the developer the SEO sort of flies it, and like in the real world, like the way that it interacts with various different things is different. So yeah, that's something that's really useful for understanding how the site is performing and how it's crawlable and how it's readable online and before you go live. But in a migration setting, it's also useful. There's a couple of different Chrome extensions that are really useful for sort of understanding like what the page was before and or like what the page is now and versus what it's going to be in the future. So I was working with a client the other day and they were talking about changing their homepage, which isn't a full migration, but changing a homepage can change a lot because most websites, the homepage is the most visited page. So if you change the number of links on that page, then that can change, the crawl depth, and that can change the performance overall. So yeah, there's a couple of different tools. There's a tool that I use called SEO Pro Extension, which is really, really good. With Christina Azarenko put it together. I think you interviewed her previously on another thing. Yes, it's fantastic. And so I use that a lot. So that can tell you what you've got now. Also, a tool that I use particularly with migrations, if you're thinking like, let's say you've developed something and the client says it's not as good as it was before. but that website is gone. Right? Something called Wayback Machine is really good. I've used that a few times to sort of understand why a site before was working and why it's not now. So there was a site that we had where they used to have a sort of most recent content sort of feed showing on the homepage, and that helped with crawl depth and helped with sort of redundancy of new content and that sort of thing. And then when we moved to the new website, it didn't have that. So when we moved, so using Wayback Machine, I was like, we need to put that back on so that goes back, so that gives us more tools. We think that we need a super whizzy technical fix, and sometimes it's not necessarily the case that you need something super fancy. I know there's a lot of AI at the moment, and there's a lot of automation and lots of things like that, but sometimes you can do something pretty straightforward that will fix it. So for instance, I've seen it before where from an SEO point of view, there's like, we're looking around and we're going, oh, there's a bunch of 404s, and oh, we need to fix this. The developer needs to sort something out or something. It's like, well, if there's a if you've got loads and loads of 404s, like let's say most of the pages on your website have like 7 links, and there's 400 or then 75 404s to this one URL. It's probably in your menu. You've probably got a 404 in your menu. And you probably just need to change the link on the menu. And sometimes people think, oh, we need to like do this whole thing and fix that. It's like you might literally just need to change one little thing that isn't even a dev thing, for instance. So I think that yeah, I think thinking about what is really genuinely required from a development point of view is really, really useful. And also thinking about how complex the solution might be. And so, for instance, in the situation you were talking about, where you built it one way, and there's a and the SEO wants a bunch of other things. If your tech stack is resistant to the implementation that you want, then there might be an external tool that you can use that solves the solution, or that gets you where you need to go, or there might be another way that you can do it. So, for instance, I had a situation where I wanted an RSS. We were trying to build an RSS, directly on the website, and we ended up using a third-party tool, and it works fine. It does exactly what I need it to do. And we, or I could have spent a month trying to get someone to build one from scratch, doing this. But why? I got a third party tool. It works perfectly fine. It doesn't cause, there's no third party, I don't have any third party lag from any JavaScript. It's literally just one little line, and it's totally fine.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes
I had another.
It's just that.
Yeah, and I've had other times where, like for instance, structured data is something where, everybody's going JSON, and JSON is fantastic. But if the website already has a microdata set up, then you might be able to move the needle more quickly, by just updating the microdata if it's already in place. So I think it's useful from an SEO point of view to think about not only what moves the needle, but also what moves the needle efficiently. And from a tech point of view, and from an SEO point of view.
And I really like that statement, because I wish a lot of the SEOs that I had to work with in the past would acknowledge that. And oftentimes I feel like there is a bit of dogmatism in the way that some people operate, as in, like, as you say, you identify the thing that moves the needle and moves the needle efficiently, like what is easy to do, but like has lots of impact. And we discussed that in a previous episode as well. But the thing is, oftentimes it seems that people, SEO specifically, go from half knowledge of someone on the internet said, or it used to be like that 10 years ago, and then just ask for a solution for something that isn't even a problem in the first place. JavaScript is one topic that invites this kind of situations, it seems. It's like there's still a lot of people wandering around like, whoa, no, we need to implement dynamic rendering or server-side rendering for this client-side rendered application because unless we do that, it won't show up in search. And then I'm like, but if I Google for a thing on your page, then it shows up. So it's already there, and I see that it has traffic in Google Search Console. It gets the impressions, it gets the clicks. Why are we doing this? Oh, because Google doesn't understand client-side rendered JavaScript applications. And I'm like, but the data clearly shows that it does, right? It's there. I'm not saying that is true for all the situations and all the cases and all the pages. Yes, for some pages it still matters. For some, it still makes a lot of sense. If you see a problem, then this might be a solution to that problem if the client-side rendering really is the issue that you're dealing with. But oftentimes it just isn't. And then you spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money on implementing something that invites more trouble for solving nothing. Why does that happen?
I think sometimes people will hear a buzzword, or they'll hear like, oh yeah, we really need to sort out this and that, and so I think sometimes people get excited about a new thing, and I mean, I can hold my hand up. There's definitely been a time when I've done that. But the other thing I think would be really, really useful, which I would appreciate as an SEO, speaking with devs, is that if you don't know what I'm talking about, tell me that you don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yes. 100% yes. Yes, please.
And also, if you do, and if you need me to give it to you in a different way, please let me know. There's a lot of tools that will help you to do that. So I use a lot of like screen recording tools. So like Loom is one that I use a lot. And I think Slack now has an integration where you can just record your screen really, really quickly and send it in a Slack message. And that makes a really big difference. Chrome Developer Tools is fantastic. I do tons of PowerPoints where I'm just like, this is here, and that is like this, and this is like that, and that is there. And sometimes if you can see it and if you can show them the code, then even if you don't know the exact words, they can figure out what you're talking about. But it's also useful to learn some of the words as an SEO. So like learning what is and isn't a variable. Learning about what's going on with your server, what's going on with your, like how is it deployed, like how is all of that working. It really helps from an SEO point of view for you to get things actioned quicker if you can give the developers more information. So for instance, there's a couple of sites where I have access to the folders and things, and I can root around in Bitbucket or whatever, and I don't change things very often, but I can root around, and for some like I have some clients, I've had clients where they still had a sort of a static sitemap, and I was generating the static sitemap, and they're smaller sites or whatever, and if that's something that's taking dev resource, you can ask them like, can I have access please, and then you can learn how to do it, and you can do it like creating a static sitemap is a really simple operation. Uploading it is really simple. But but waiting around for one can be quite a pain. So if you can do it as an SEO, then that's really, really great. So there's some things where you can ask for access to certain parts of the stack so that you can give them better information. But again, that's about building trust. So if you have the conversations with your developers, before things get heated, before things are broken, before you start moving around like everything, then it really helps. And I mean, even if you're working with remote teams, like I work with a few remote developers. We have developers in house, but we also have developers that we work with for that I work with for other clients, or developers that work in other countries, and we use Slack and email and stuff. And I will literally send like emojis and like hooray gifs and that sort of thing. Like if they fix something, I'm like, oh hooray, thank you so much. Like say thank you gets you so far.
Same for developers towards SEOs, by the way. If I made it a point whenever I was like something was pointed out to me where we could do better, then we just did, and then we saw the business impact, and then it's like, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention, and thank you a lot for guiding me through the process, because oftentimes I didn't know why I was doing something or how exactly it's expected to be and where I would verify if it's done correctly. And then having someone to guide me through that was great. And I was grateful for it. So say thank you.
Right, absolutely. And if you work really well, then like as a developer, like that's that's adding another string to your bow. Like then it's something that, it just keeps it makes everything better. So yeah, I think that
Yeah,
building it's really important to build good relationships in that way.
absolutely. So I think it's important to communicate if you don't understand something. Be it you as an SEO or you as a developer. If you're not sure about something, just ask. Find the tools that the other people are using. Just ask your developers, what tools are you using? Ask the SEOs, what tools should I be using to check when I'm building this or implementing this or fixing this. Phrasing it as opportunities of improvement is probably much better than phrasing it as a problem or a challenge. And yeah, if we just work together in finding the right solutions together, I think we are doing each other big favors. I guess that sums it up quite nicely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, Crystal. This has been really exciting and interesting, and I do hope that everyone out there got something out of it as well. I certainly did, and I am looking forward to see what other cool things you'll be sharing with the community and us in the future. And yeah, again, thanks a lot for joining, and take care. Have a great time. Bye.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Just gonna say I'm a huge fan.
I thought that would be like smooth. It was really not.